The year is 1532, and the world stands on the precipice of one of history's most astonishing and tragic conquests. A moment when a tiny band of Spanish adventurers will topple an empire that stretched across mountains, deserts, and jungles. An empire of millions governed by a divine ruler whose word was absolute law. The Inca Empire, known as Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters, sprawls across what we now call Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina, a civilization that has achieved what no other has in the Americas. A fully integrated state with roads that rival Rome's, agricultural terraces that defy gravity, and administrative systems that would impress any modern bureaucrat. From the capital city of Cusco, high in the Andean peaks where the air is thin and the stones fit together so perfectly that not even a knife blade can slip between them, the Sapa Inca rules over perhaps 10 million subjects, each one bound to him by ties of religion, tradition, and the belief that he is the son of the sun god Inti himself. This empire has no written language, yet it maintains perfect records using knotted strings called quipus. It has no wheeled vehicles, yet it moves armies and supplies across thousands of miles with ruthless efficiency. It has no iron tools, yet it carves and places stones weighing hundreds of tons with precision that still baffles engineers today. The Inca state is a marvel of human organization, a testament to what can be achieved through collective effort, rigid hierarchy, and the harnessing of diverse peoples into a single unified vision. But empires, no matter how mighty, carry within them the seeds of their own destruction, and the Inca Empire in 1532 is a colossus with fractures running through its foundation, cracks that a man named Francisco Pizarro will exploit with cunning, brutality, and an audacity that borders on madness. Francisco Pizarro is not a man of noble birth or refined education. He is the illegitimate son of a Spanish infantry captain, born around 1478 in the dusty town of Trujillo in Extremadura, a harsh and unforgiving region that breeds hard men with harder dreams. Legend says he spent his youth as a swineherd, illiterate and poor, watching the pigs root in the dirt while he dreamed of something more, something greater than the life of poverty that seemed his destiny. Spain in Pizarro's youth is a nation transformed by the Reconquista, the centuries-long campaign to drive the Moors from the Iberian Peninsula, and by Christopher Columbus's voyages that have opened a new world filled with gold, silver, and the promise of glory. Young men like Pizarro, with nothing to lose and everything to gain, are drawn to the Americas like moths to a flame, willing to risk death, disease, and damnation for the chance to carve out a fortune from the unknown. Pizarro arrives in the New World in 1502, and for 3 decades he learns the brutal trade of the conquistador, participating in expeditions across Panama and Central America, witnessing the destruction of indigenous civilizations, the enslavement of native peoples, and the accumulation of wealth beyond imagination by those ruthless enough to seize it. He watches as Hernán Cortés, another son of Extremadura, conquers the mighty Aztec Empire with a few hundred men, and Pizarro's ambition ignites like dry tinder. If Cortés can topple Moctezuma and claim Mexico for Spain and himself, why cannot Pizarro do the same in the lands to the south, where rumors speak of a kingdom even richer, a place where gold is as common as stone and emeralds lie scattered like pebbles? By 1524, Pizarro has formed a partnership with Diego de Almagro, a fellow adventurer, and Hernando de Luque, a priest who provides financial backing, and together they launch a series of exploratory expeditions down the Pacific coast of South America. The first 2 voyages are disasters, marked by starvation, disease, hostile natives, and the loss of men to tropical fevers and Indian arrows. But Pizarro refuses to turn back, driven by an obsession that his companions begin to think borders on insanity. On Gallo Island during the second expedition, when his men are ready to mutiny and return to Panama, Pizarro draws a line in the sand with his sword and challenges them. Those who desire wealth and glory should cross the line and continue south with him. Those who prefer poverty and safety should return north. Only 13 men, Los 13 de la Fama, the famous 13, crossed the line to join him, and these 14 men, starving and desperate, continue southward until they reach Tumbes, a coastal city of the Inca Empire where they witness for the first time the wealth they have been seeking. They see buildings plated with gold, temples dedicated to the sun, llamas bearing loads through streets more organized than anything in Panama, and people wearing textiles finer than European silk. Pizarro knows he has found his prize, his Mexico, but he also knows he lacks the men, the weapons, and the royal authorization to attempt a conquest. He returns to Spain in 1528, presents himself before King Charles V, and with the confidence of a man who has nothing left to lose, requests permission to conquer this kingdom in the name of the Spanish crown. Charles, always in need of gold to fund his European wars and his sprawling empire, grants Pizarro the title of Governor and Captain General of Peru, though Peru is a land Pizarro does not yet control, and provides him with minimal support, leaving Pizarro to recruit his own men and secure his own financing. Pizarro returns to Panama and then sails south in January 1531 with approximately 180 men and 37 horses, a force so small that it seems absurd to imagine it could threaten an empire of millions. Yet Pizarro has several advantages that he may not fully appreciate but will exploit to devastating effect. First, the horse is unknown in the Americas, and to the indigenous peoples, these animals appear to be fearsome beasts, perhaps even supernatural, and the Spanish cavalry, though few in number, will strike terror into formations of thousands. Second, Spanish steel is far superior to anything the Incas possess. Their clubs, slings, and bronze axes cannot penetrate Spanish armor, while Spanish swords, pikes, and especially the harquebuses, primitive firearms that are more psychological weapon than practical tool, create shock and awe on the battlefield. Third, and perhaps most crucially, the Inca Empire in 1532 is in the midst of a devastating civil war between two brothers, Huascar and Atahualpa, sons of the previous Sapa Inca, Huayna Capac, who died around 1527 from a mysterious plague that swept through the empire, killing perhaps a third of the population and throwing the succession into chaos. This plague was almost certainly smallpox or measles, diseases brought by Europeans to which the native peoples have no immunity, and it arrived in the Inca Empire before the Spanish themselves, traveling along trade routes from the Caribbean and Central America, an invisible vanguard of conquest that killed millions and destabilized the greatest empire in South America. Huayna Capac's death created a succession crisis because, contrary to Inca tradition which favored the son of the Sapa Inca and his principal wife, Huayna Capac apparently favored Atahualpa, a capable military commander who had accompanied his father on campaigns in the north, while Huascar, the traditional heir, controlled Cusco and the imperial heartland. The civil war that erupted was brutal and total, with armies numbering in the tens of thousands clashing across the empire, cities being sacked, nobles being executed, and the very fabric of Inca unity being torn apart. By the time Pizarro lands on the coast, Atahualpa has won the civil war. His generals have captured Huascar and executed most of the royal family in Cusco, but the empire is exhausted, traumatized, and divided, with many ethnic groups that were forcibly incorporated into Tawantinsuyu seeing the chaos as an opportunity for revenge or independence. Pizarro's force lands at Tumbes in 1532, but the city they saw on their previous voyage is now in ruins, destroyed during the Civil War, and the Spanish quickly realize that the empire is fractured. They march inland, slowly and cautiously, establishing a Spanish settlement at San Miguel de Pura, and gathering intelligence about the political situation. Pizarro learns that Atahualpa is camped with his army at Cajamarca, a highland city in northern Peru, and that the Sapa Inca has just completed his victory over Huascar and is relaxing in the hot springs near the city, unaware that the strangers who have landed on his coast represent a threat unlike any his empire has ever faced. Pizarro makes a decision that seems suicidal. He will march his tiny force into the heart of the Inca Empire, climb the treacherous mountain paths where his men and horses are vulnerable to ambush, and confront Atahualpa directly. His men are terrified, and some beg him to turn back, to wait for reinforcements, to proceed more cautiously, but Pizarro understands that hesitation means death. He has studied Cortez's conquest of the Aztecs, and he knows that Cortez succeeded by capturing Moctezuma and using the Aztec emperor as a puppet. Pizarro plans to do the same with Atahualpa, to seize the living God King and paralyze the empire through his capture. It is a desperate gamble, but Pizarro has spent his entire life making desperate gambles, and he believes that fortune favors the audacious. The march to Cajamarca takes weeks, and it is a journey through some of the most difficult terrain on Earth, where mountain passes rise to altitudes that leave men gasping for breath, and where narrow paths cling to cliff faces with drops of thousands of feet. The Spanish are convinced they are marching into a trap, and indeed, Atahualpa's generals urge him to destroy these invaders while they are strung out and vulnerable on the mountain roads. But Atahualpa, confident in his power and curious about these strange bearded men with their animals and weapons, allows them to approach. He has heard reports of the Spanish, knows they defeated some of his coastal garrisons, but he does not perceive them as a serious threat. After all, he commands an army estimated at 40,000 to 80,000 men camped around Cajamarca, while the Spanish number fewer than 200, and he has recently defeated his brother's armies and proven himself the supreme military commander of the most powerful state in South America. Atahualpa may also believe that these strangers could be useful, that they might serve as allies or mercenaries, or perhaps he simply wants to see these creatures and their horses for himself before deciding their fate. Whatever his reasoning, he sends messages to Pizarro that he will meet with him in Cajamarca, a decision that will alter the course of history and seal the doom of his empire. Pizarro's force enters Cajamarca on November 15, 1532, and the city appears deserted, though the Spanish can see thousands of Inca tents spread across the hills surrounding the town and the smoke of countless campfires rising into the mountain air. The Spanish occupy the main square, a large open plaza surrounded by buildings, and Pizarro immediately recognizes the tactical opportunity. The square is enclosed with only two narrow entrances, a perfect killing ground if he can lure Atahualpa into it. He sends his brother Hernando Pizarro and Hernando de Soto to meet with Atahualpa, and these emissaries ride to the Inca camp where they are granted an audience with the Sapa Inca himself. Atahualpa sits on a low stool surrounded by his wives, nobles, and warriors, dressed in the finest textiles and adorned with gold and jewels, radiating power and confidence. De Soto, attempting to intimidate the Inca ruler, rides his horse directly at Atahualpa and stops just short of him. But Atahualpa does not flinch, his face remaining impassive while several of his attendants who did flinch are later executed for showing fear before their god king. The Spanish deliver Pizarro's invitation for Atahualpa to visit him in Cajamarca the following day, and Atahualpa agrees, saying he will come in the afternoon with his retinue. That night, the Spanish make their preparations and Pizarro reveals his plan to his men. They will hide cavalry and infantry in the buildings around the square, and when Atahualpa enters with his entourage, they will spring the trap, capture the Sapa Inca, and slaughter his guards. It is an insane plan that depends on surprise, speed, and the shock value of their weapons, but it is the only plan they have because facing the Inca army in open battle would be certain death. November 16, 1532, dawns cold and clear in the high Andes, and the Spanish wait in their hiding places, cramped in the buildings around the square. Their nerves stretch to breaking point as the morning passes, then midday, then afternoon, and still Atahualpa does not come. Some of the Spanish urinate on themselves in fear, and Pizarro moves among them, keeping them steady, reminding them that God and Santiago, Spain's patron saint, are on their side, and that the riches of this empire will be theirs if they hold their nerve. Finally, in the late afternoon, word comes that Atahualpa is approaching, and the Spanish peer through cracks and windows to see a procession unlike anything they have witnessed before. Thousands of Incas are entering the valley, and at the center, carried on a golden litter by 80 nobles dressed in livery of blue, comes Atahualpa himself, wearing a crown with gold fringe that hangs before his eyes, his body adorned with emeralds and golden ornaments, surrounded by singers, dancers, and warriors sweeping the ground before him clean of every pebble and blade of grass. The procession is meant to display the majesty and power of the Sapa Inca, but Atahualpa has made a fatal error. The warriors accompanying him carry ceremonial weapons, not battle gear, because Atahualpa does not believe he is entering a combat situation. He thinks he is meeting with supplicants who will acknowledge his supremacy. The procession enters the main square, perhaps 5,000 to 7,000 Incas filling the plaza, and Atahualpa's litter is set down in the center while his attendants stand in packed ranks around him, waiting to see what the Spanish will do. Pizarro sends out Friar Vicente de Valverde, a Dominican priest, carrying a cross and a Bible, and through an interpreter, Valverde delivers the requerimiento, a Spanish legal document that demands Atahualpa acknowledge the Pope's authority, convert to Christianity, and submit to Spanish rule. Atahualpa, who cannot understand why these strangers presume to tell him, the son of the sun, what to do, asks to see the book from which Valverde is reading, and when the priest hands him the Bible, Atahualpa examines it, holds it to his ear as if listening for something, and then throws it to the ground, declaring that he is no man's vassal and that the Spanish must account for the plundering they have done in his lands. Valverde retrieves the Bible and runs back to Pizarro, shouting that the Inca has rejected God and the king, and Pizarro knows this is the moment. There will be no negotiation, no peaceful resolution, only violence. He gives the signal, a white scarf dropped or a shot fired, accounts vary, and suddenly the square erupts in chaos as Spanish cavalry burst from their hiding places, crashing into the packed mass of Incas, while harquebuses fire and Spanish infantry charge with swords drawn. The Incas, trapped in the confined space with no room to maneuver and carrying mostly ceremonial weapons, are slaughtered. The horses trample them, the steel cuts through them, the noise and smoke and sheer terror paralyze them, and within minutes the square is filled with thousands of bodies as the Spanish cut their way toward Atahualpa's litter. The nobles carrying the litter die defending their god-king, and as each is cut down, another steps forward to take his place, displaying a loyalty and courage that the Spanish will grudgingly admire even as they kill them. Pizarro himself fights his way to Atahualpa, and in the only moment of the battle where a Spaniard is wounded, Pizarro receives a cut on his hand when he deflects a blow meant for Atahualpa. Because Pizarro's orders are clear, the Sapa Inca must be taken alive. Finally, they drag Atahualpa from his litter, and the fighting ends as the remaining Incas flee in panic, pursued by Spanish cavalry who cut them down as they run. In less than 2 hours, perhaps 7,000 Incas lie dead in the square and the surrounding fields, while not a single Spaniard has been killed, though many are wounded, mostly from fighting each other in the chaos. Atahualpa, the divine ruler of the greatest empire in the Americas, is now a prisoner of 168 Spanish adventurers, and the conquest of the Inca Empire has begun. The immediate aftermath of Cajamarca is one of shock and disbelief on both sides. The Incas cannot comprehend what has happened, how their god-king could be captured, how their warriors could be slaughtered so easily, while the Spanish can barely believe their own success and immediately begin looting the Inca camp, seizing gold, silver, textiles, and prisoners. Atahualpa, imprisoned in a building in Cajamarca, quickly realizes the Spanish are motivated primarily by gold, and he makes an offer that will become legendary. He will fill the room in which he is imprisoned with gold, once up to a line he marks on the wall as high as he can reach, and he will fill an adjacent smaller room twice with silver, if Pizarro will release him. Pizarro agrees, though he almost certainly has no intention of honoring the bargain, and Atahualpa sends orders throughout his empire for gold and silver to be brought to Cajamarca. Over the following months, an astonishing treasure accumulates. Golden plates from temple walls, life-sized golden statues, intricate jewelry, ceremonial objects of exquisite craftsmanship, and so much silver that the Spanish run out of places to store it. The ransom Atahualpa assembles is valued at approximately 13,420 pounds of gold and 26,000 pounds of silver, worth many millions in modern currency, but more tragically, it represents the destruction of irreplaceable works of art, centuries of Inca metallurgical and artistic achievement, because the Spanish melted all down into bars for easier transport, destroying forever the cultural heritage of an entire civilization in their greed for bullion. While Atahualpa assembles his ransom, he remains Pizarro's prisoner, and the dynamic between captor and captive is complex. Atahualpa learns Spanish, plays chess with his captors, and maintains his dignity and authority despite his imprisonment, still issuing orders that his subjects obey, because to them he remains the Sapa Inca, the divine son of the sun, and his capture does not diminish his sacred status. Pizarro, however, faces a dilemma. What to do with Atahualpa once the ransom is paid, and if he releases him, Atahualpa could rally his armies and drive the Spanish from Peru. If he keeps him prisoner indefinitely, he risks an Inca attack to free their ruler. But if he kills Atahualpa, he eliminates the single most powerful figure holding the empire together. Meanwhile, the political situation becomes more complicated when the Spanish learn that Huascar, Atahualpa's brother and rival, is still alive, held prisoner by Atahualpa's generals, and some Spanish suggest they should ally with Huascar's faction, which represents the traditional nobility in Cusco who resent Atahualpa's victory. Atahualpa, learning of these discussions, orders Huascar's execution, a command that is carried out, eliminating the last potential rallying point for those who opposed Atahualpa's rule, but also removing any possibility that the Spanish could play the brothers against each other. As the ransom nears completion, Spanish reinforcements arrive at Cajamarca, including Diego de Almagro, Pizarro's partner, with additional men, and these new arrivals, who did not participate in the capture and feel entitled to a share of the treasure, create tension and pressure Pizarro to resolve the situation. Rumors spread among the Spanish that Atahualpa is secretly planning an attack, that Inca armies are massing to rescue him, and while these rumors are largely false or exaggerated, they provide Pizarro with the justification he needs to make his decision. On July 26, 1533, after a hasty trial in which Atahualpa is charged with murdering Huascar, practicing idolatry, having multiple wives, and plotting against the Spanish, he is sentenced to death by burning, the standard punishment for heretics. Atahualpa is horrified by the sentence because Inca religion requires the preservation of the body for the afterlife, and he pleads with the Spanish to execute him by another method. Valverde, the priest who delivered the requerimiento, offers a grim bargain. If Atahualpa converts to Christianity and accepts baptism, he will be strangled by garrote instead of burned. Atahualpa, facing an impossible choice, accepts baptism, taking the Christian name Francisco in honor of Pizarro, and on that same evening, he is led to the stake in Cajamarca Square, where a garrote is placed around his neck and tightened until he dies. The execution of Atahualpa is witnessed by the same Spanish who captured him, and some later express regret or guilt, recognizing that they have killed a great ruler for reasons of expediency rather than justice. But in the moment, Pizarro believes he has solved his dilemma and cleared the path to conquering the rest of the empire. What Pizarro does not fully appreciate is that by killing Atahualpa, he has decapitated the Inca state. The Sapa Inca was not merely a political leader but the living embodiment of the state, the divine link between the human and cosmic realms, and his death creates a vacuum that will never be adequately filled, leaving the empire paralyzed and unable to mount a coordinated resistance. With Atahualpa dead and the ransom divided among the conquistadors, Pizarro marches on Cusco, the imperial capital, arriving in November 1533 with a force now swelled to about 600 Spanish plus thousands of indigenous allies, many of them from groups that resented Inca rule and see the Spanish as liberators or at least as useful allies in settling old scores. The Spanish expect to fight a major battle for Cusco, but instead they find the city largely abandoned by Atahualpa's generals, who have withdrawn after sacking parts of the city and executing many of the traditional nobility. Pizarro enters Cusco and is stunned by what he sees. A city of stone buildings fitted so precisely that mortar is unnecessary. Streets laid out in a grid, temples covered in gold plate, and a sophistication that rivals anything in Europe. The Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun, is particularly magnificent, its walls lined with golden plates, its garden filled with life-sized golden statues of llamas, corn plants, and other offerings. A display of wealth and devotion that takes the Spanish breath away even as they strip it bare and melt it down. Pizarro establishes Spanish authority in Cusco and installs a puppet ruler, Manco Inca, a young nobleman from the traditional royal family who believes he can use the Spanish to consolidate his own power and restore the empire under his rule, not realizing that the Spanish have no intention of leaving or sharing power. The conquest, however, is far from over, because while the Spanish control Cusco and the Central Highlands, much of the empire remains unconquered, and more importantly, the Spanish themselves are beginning to fracture along lines of greed, ambition, and personal rivalry. Diego de Almagro, Pizarro's partner, feels cheated of his fair share and demands his own governorship. The men who arrived after Cajamarca resent those who received larger shares of Atahualpa's ransom, and everyone is competing for the best encomiendas, grants of indigenous labor and tribute that will make them wealthy. Pizarro tries to manage these tensions by sending Almagro south to explore and conquer Chile, hoping that Almagro will find his own riches and leave Peru to Pizarro. But this only delays the inevitable conflict. Meanwhile, Manco Inca, the puppet ruler installed by Pizarro, grows increasingly resentful of Spanish demands. Their disrespect for Inca traditions, their abuse of Inca women, and their insatiable appetite for gold and labor. In 1536, Manco rebels, escaping from Cusco and raising an army that besieges the city with perhaps 100,000 warriors, coming within hours of retaking the capital and potentially driving the Spanish from Peru. The siege of Cusco is desperate, with the Spanish defenders, numbering fewer than 200, fighting off daily attacks while their indigenous allies waver and food runs short. Manco's forces set fire to the city's thatched roofs, and the Spanish retreat to the great stone fortress of Sacsayhuaman overlooking Cusco, where they make their last stand. In one of the most dramatic actions of the conquest, Juan Pizarro, Francisco's younger brother, leads a cavalry charge uphill against Sacsayhuaman, and though Juan is killed in the assault, the Spanish manage to retake the fortress and break the siege, forcing Manco to withdraw to the remote jungle fortress of Vilcabamba, where he and his successors will maintain a rump Inca state for another 36 years, a thorn in the side of Spanish rule, but no longer a serious threat to Spanish dominance. The failure of Manco's rebellion marks the effective end of Inca resistance, but the Spanish conquest of Peru descends into a series of brutal civil wars among the conquistadors themselves, conflicts that will kill more Spanish than the Incas ever did. In 1538, Diego de Almagro returns from Chile empty-handed and tries to seize Cusco from Pizarro, sparking a war between the two former partners that ends with Almagro's capture and execution. Almagro's mestizo son and his supporters seek revenge, and in 1541, they break into Pizarro's palace in Lima and assassinate the great conquistador, stabbing him to death as he tries to defend himself with his sword. The Spanish crown sends a viceroy to restore order, but the conflicts continue for years, with competing factions of conquistadors fighting each other for control of Peru's wealth, while the indigenous population, decimated by disease, forced labor, and the destruction of their social systems, declines catastrophically. By 1600, less than 70 years after Pizarro's landing, the indigenous population of Peru has declined by perhaps 90%, from 10 million to 1 million, a demographic catastrophe unparalleled in human history, caused by the triple hammers of epidemic disease, economic exploitation, and cultural destruction. The years following Pizarro's death witnessed Peru descending into even greater chaos, as different factions of conquistadors wage brutal wars against each other and against the Spanish crown's attempts to impose order and authority over what has become the most valuable colonial possession in the world. The crown, alarmed by reports of conquistador excesses and concerned about losing control over Peru's vast mineral wealth, sends Blasco Núñez Vela as the first viceroy in 1544, with orders to enforce the new laws, revolutionary legislation designed to protect indigenous peoples from the worst abuses of the encomienda system, and to curtail the power of the conquistadors who have become virtually independent warlords. The new laws prohibit the enslavement of Indians, limit the inheritability of encomiendas, and establish that encomiendas should revert to the crown upon the death of current holders, measures that, if implemented, would strip the conquistadors of their wealth and power. The encomenderos, as the holders of encomiendas are called, react with fury, seeing these laws as a betrayal by the crown they conquered Peru for, and they rally behind Gonzalo Pizarro, Francisco's younger brother, who becomes the leader of a rebellion against royal authority. Gonzalo Pizarro raises an army, defeats and kills Viceroy Núñez Vela in battle in 1546, and for several years rules Peru as a virtually independent sovereign, while the Spanish crown, unable to project sufficient military force across the Atlantic, can do nothing but watch. The rebellion of Gonzalo Pizarro represents a critical moment when Peru might have broken away from Spanish control entirely, establishing itself as an independent kingdom under conquistador rule. But Gonzalo lacks the political skill to consolidate his position, alienates potential allies through his harshness, and fatally underestimates the determination of the Spanish crown to reassert control. In 1547, the crown sends Pedro de la Gasca, a priest and skilled diplomat, to Peru with full authority to negotiate, pardon, and if necessary destroy the rebels, and La Gasca proves to be exactly the right man for the job. Unlike the rigid Núñez Vela, La Gasca is flexible, pragmatic, and willing to make deals. He offers pardons to rebels who desert Gonzalo, promises to suspend the most hated provisions of the new laws, and uses a combination of bribery, persuasion, and political manipulation to peel away Gonzalo's support. Gonzalo's army, which at its peak numbers several thousand men, begins to melt away as soldiers and captains defect to the royalist side, attracted by La Gasca's promises of pardon and reward, and by 1548, when the two armies finally meet at the Battle of Jacuajuana near Cusco, Gonzalo's forces have dwindled to a few hundred loyalists. The battle is barely a fight. Gonzalo's remaining supporters desert en masse when they see the size of La Gasca's army, and Gonzalo himself is captured, tried for treason, and beheaded in Cusco, his head displayed on a pike as a warning to anyone else who might consider rebellion against the crown. La Gasca's victory reestablishes royal authority in Peru, but the price is high. The new laws are effectively gutted, the encomienda system continues largely unchanged, and the conquistadors, though now technically subordinate to the crown, retain enormous power and wealth, creating a colonial elite that will dominate Peru for centuries and establish patterns of exploitation and inequality that persist into the present day. While the Spanish fight among themselves for control of Peru's wealth, the indigenous population continues to suffer catastrophically, not primarily from Spanish violence, though that is certainly a factor, but from the invisible killer that accompanies European colonization: epidemic disease. Smallpox, which killed Huayna Capac and triggered the civil war that facilitated the conquest, is only the first wave. Measles arrives in the 1530s, typhus in the 1540s, influenza repeatedly, and diseases that cannot be clearly identified from historical records but which contemporary sources describe as devastating plagues that sweep through indigenous communities, killing the young, the old, the strong, and the weak indiscriminately. The indigenous peoples of the Americas have no immunity to these diseases because they have been isolated from Eurasia and Africa for thousands of years, and while Europeans, Africans, and Asians have built up population-level resistance through millennia of exposure, Americans have no such protection, making even relatively mild European diseases deadly in the New World. The demographic collapse is staggering. Historians estimate that the indigenous population of Peru declines from approximately 10 million in 1520 to less than 1 million by 1620, a 90% mortality rate sustained over a century, making it one of the greatest demographic catastrophes in recorded history. Entire communities are wiped out, leaving ghost towns and abandoned agricultural terraces. Family structures collapse when parents die and leave orphan children. Traditional knowledge is lost when elders perish before they can pass on their wisdom, and the social fabric of indigenous society is torn apart by the relentless succession of epidemics that strike every few years, never allowing populations to recover before the next wave hits. The Spanish colonial system, rather than mitigating this disaster, makes it worse by imposing crushing labor demands on the surviving indigenous population through the encomienda and later the mita systems. The encomienda grants Spanish colonists the right to extract tribute and labor from indigenous communities assigned to them, and while the system is theoretically supposed to be reciprocal, with the encomendero providing protection and Christian instruction in exchange for labor and tribute, in practice it becomes a system of brutal exploitation where indigenous peoples are worked to exhaustion, their agricultural surplus is seized, and their traditional community structures destroyed. The mita, adapted from the Inca Empire labor system but transformed into something far more oppressive, requires indigenous communities to provide a quota of workers for Spanish enterprises, particularly the silver mines of Potosi, which become the economic engine of the Spanish Empire and a death sentence for the thousands of indigenous workers forced to labor in them. Potosi, located in present-day Bolivia at an altitude of over 13,000 feet, contains one of the richest silver deposits ever discovered, and from the 1540s until well into the 18th century, it produces the silver that finances Spanish power in Europe, funds Spanish wars against Protestants and Ottomans, and underwrites the Spanish Golden Age of arts and literature. But this wealth is extracted at horrific human cost. Indigenous workers, forced to labor in the mines for months at a time, descend into the mountain through narrow shafts, work in darkness lit only by candles, breathe toxic mercury fumes used in silver processing, and die in cave-ins, from silicosis, from mercury poisoning, or simply from exhaustion and malnutrition. The saying emerges that Potosi is a mouth that devours Indians, and estimates suggest that as many as 8 million indigenous workers die in the Potosi mines over 3 centuries. Their bodies literally converted into silver bars that flow to Spain and from there to the rest of the world, funding European commerce and making Peru synonymous with unimaginable wealth and equally unimaginable suffering. The Catholic Church plays a complex and contradictory role in the conquest and colonization of Peru, serving simultaneously as an agent of cultural destruction, a limited protector of indigenous peoples, and a preserver of indigenous knowledge even as it works to eliminate indigenous religions. Spanish missionaries, particularly Dominicans, Franciscans, and Jesuits, arrive in Peru believing genuinely that they are saving indigenous souls from damnation, that Christianity represents ultimate truth, and that the elimination of indigenous religions, which they view as devil worship, is a spiritual necessity and an act of charity. They systematically destroy indigenous religious sites, burn quipus and other records they suspect of containing religious content, persecute native priests and religious specialists, and wage campaigns against what they call idolatry, the persistence of indigenous religious practices. The extirpation of idolatry campaigns in the 17th century sees Spanish priests traveling through the Andes, interrogating indigenous people about their religious practices, destroying shrines and sacred objects, punishing those who maintain traditional beliefs, and creating an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that forces indigenous religion underground, where it survives in syncretic forms blended with Catholic elements, emerging in festivals, rituals, and beliefs that persist to the present day. Yet some missionaries, particularly Bartolomé de las Casas and later advocates, protest the treatment of indigenous peoples, arguing that Indians are rational beings with souls who should be converted through persuasion rather than force, and that the brutal exploitation of the encomienda system is sinful and contrary to Christian teaching. These protests lead to reforms, including the new laws, and help establish the principle, however imperfectly applied, that indigenous peoples have legal rights and should be protected from the worst abuses, even if this protection is limited and often ineffective. Missionaries also, ironically, become some of the primary preservers of indigenous knowledge, learning Quechua and other native languages, recording indigenous histories and customs, and creating the written sources that allow us to reconstruct aspects of pre-conquest Andean civilization, even as their primary purpose is to facilitate conversion and cultural transformation. The Spanish introduced new crops, animals, technologies, and social structures to Peru that fundamentally transform the landscape, economy, and culture of the Andes. Wheat, barley, and European vegetables are planted alongside native crops. Cattle, sheep, pigs, and chickens are introduced, competing with llamas and alpacas and transforming grazing patterns. The plow and wheeled vehicles arrive, changing agricultural practices and Spanish architectural styles, featuring European-style churches, government buildings, and urban layouts, are imposed on cities like Lima, which Pizarro founds in 1535 as the new colonial capital because its coastal location facilitates communication with Spain, even though it means abandoning the highland orientation of the Inca Empire. The colonial economy becomes organized around the extraction of silver, the production of agricultural goods for Spanish consumption, and the provision of supplies for the mining centers, creating trade networks that link Peru to Mexico, Spain, and eventually to the Philippines through the famous Manila galleons that carry Peruvian silver across the Pacific to purchase Asian goods, particularly Chinese silk and porcelain, which flow back to Mexico and Peru, creating the first truly global trade system. This economic integration enriches Spanish merchants and officials, creates a new colonial elite of Creoles, Spaniards born in the Americas who occupy an intermediate position between peninsular Spaniards and the indigenous and mixed-race populations, and establishes economic patterns where Peru's wealth flows outward to enrich Spain and other parts of the world, while the indigenous population that produces this wealth remains impoverished and oppressed. The social structure of colonial Peru is rigid, complex, and explicitly racial, organized in a hierarchy called the Sistema de Castas that categorizes individuals by their racial ancestry and assigns legal status, economic opportunities, and social prestige accordingly. At the top are peninsular Spaniards, born in Spain, who hold the highest government and church positions and consider themselves superior to everyone else. Below them are Creoles, Spanish by ancestry but American by birth, who control much of the colonial economy and resent their exclusion from top positions. Then come mestizos, people of mixed Spanish and indigenous ancestry, whose numbers grow throughout the colonial period and who occupy middle positions as artisans, small merchants, and supervisors. Indigenous peoples, despite their demographic dominance, occupy the lowest legal status above only African slaves, forced to pay tribute, provide labor, and accept legal discrimination. And at the very bottom are enslaved Africans, brought to Peru to work in coastal plantations and urban households, adding another layer of exploitation and racial oppression to colonial society. This system is not merely customary but legally enforced through elaborate regulations specifying what each category of people can wear, where they can live, whom they can marry, and what occupations they can pursue, creating a colonial order based on the principle of racial hierarchy and the maintenance of Spanish and Creole dominance over everyone else. The psychological impact of this system is profound. Indigenous peoples, once subjects of a powerful empire ruled by divine kings, are reduced to the legal status of perpetual minors requiring Spanish guardianship. Their cultures are denigrated as primitive and satanic. Their histories are erased or distorted, and they are taught to internalize their supposed inferiority, creating wounds of colonialism that will take centuries to heal and whose effects remain visible in contemporary Peruvian society. Yet indigenous peoples do not simply accept Spanish rule passively. Throughout the colonial period, they resist in ways large and small, ranging from open rebellions to everyday forms of resistance that slowly undermine colonial authority. Manco Inca's rebellion in 1536 is only the first of many uprisings. In 1780 to 1783, the greatest indigenous rebellion of the colonial period erupts under the leadership of Tupac Amaru II, a mestizo Caraca, hereditary indigenous leader, who claims descent from the last Inca emperor and who leads a massive uprising that briefly threatens to overthrow Spanish rule in Peru entirely. Tupac Amaru II's rebellion begins as a protest against specific abuses, particularly the oppressive Mita system and corrupt officials, but it quickly becomes a broader movement for indigenous liberation, attracting tens of thousands of followers who attack Spanish estates, execute hated officials, and besiege Cusco itself. The rebellion terrifies the Spanish because it demonstrates that indigenous peoples, despite centuries of oppression, retain the capacity for organized resistance, and that the colonial order rests ultimately on force rather than consent. The Spanish respond with brutal repression. Tupac Amaru II is captured, forced to witness the execution of his family, and then drawn and quartered in Cusco's main square, his body parts displayed throughout the region as a warning. His followers are hunted down and executed by the thousands, and the Spanish implement harsh measures to prevent future rebellions, including banning indigenous people from using Inca symbols, wearing traditional elite dress, or speaking about Inca history. Yet the memory of Tupac Amaru II survives, becoming a powerful symbol of indigenous resistance that inspires future independence movements and remains a touchstone of indigenous identity to the present day. Beyond open rebellion, indigenous peoples resist through everyday practices that maintain aspects of their culture, preserve their languages, protect their community structures, and assert their humanity in the face of colonial oppression. They continue to speak Quechua despite Spanish efforts to impose Castilian. They maintain traditional agricultural practices alongside Spanish-imposed methods. They preserve oral histories and memories of the pre-conquest past that their ancestors passed down secretly. They blend indigenous religious beliefs with Catholic practices, creating syncretic forms of worship that honor traditional deities under the guise of Catholic saints. They use Spanish legal systems to defend their land rights, filing lawsuits, presenting petitions, and navigating colonial bureaucracy to protect community resources. And they maintain social networks based on kinship, community, and shared identity that provide mutual support and preserve collective memory. These everyday forms of resistance may seem minor compared to dramatic rebellions, but they are crucial for cultural survival, ensuring that indigenous peoples do not disappear entirely into the colonial system, but maintain distinct identities, practices, and worldviews that allow them to imagine and eventually work toward a future where they are not subordinate but equal or autonomous. The conquest of the Inca Empire and the subsequent colonization of Peru have consequences that extend far beyond the Andes, reshaping the global economy, transforming European societies, altering the balance of power among European states, and creating the foundations of the modern world system. The silver flowing from Potosi and other Peruvian mines funds the Spanish Empire's ambitious European policies, allowing Spain to wage wars against France, the Netherlands, England, and the Ottoman Empire, to sponsor the Counter-Reformation and the Catholic Church's response to Protestantism, and to maintain the largest empire the world has yet seen, stretching from the Philippines to Peru to the Netherlands. Yet this wealth also has paradoxical effects. The influx of American silver causes massive inflation in Europe, undermining the value of money and destabilizing traditional economic relationships. Spain, despite its access to enormous wealth, fails to develop a productive economy and instead uses its silver to purchase manufactured goods from other European countries, particularly the Netherlands and England, effectively transferring wealth to its competitors and rivals. And the easy wealth from American mines creates a rentier mentality among Spanish elites, who prefer living off colonial revenues rather than investing in productive enterprises, contributing to Spain's eventual economic and political decline relative to other European powers. The wealth of Peru thus enriches Spain in the short term but may actually harm its long-term development, a phenomenon economists call the resource curse, where abundant natural resources can paradoxically hinder rather than help economic development. The biological consequences of the conquest extend far beyond Peru. As the Columbian Exchange, the transfer of plants, animals, diseases, and people between the Old World and the New World transforms both hemispheres in fundamental ways. European crops and livestock spread throughout the Americas, sometimes displacing native species and always changing ecological relationships. American crops, particularly potatoes, maize, and tomatoes, spread to Europe, Africa, and Asia, providing new food sources that support population growth and economic development, with the potato, an Andean domesticate, becoming a staple food in Ireland, Germany, and Russia, and maize transforming agriculture in Africa and Asia. The demographic catastrophe that strikes indigenous Americans is mirrored by population growth in Europe and Asia, supported partly by American crops, creating a global demographic shift where European and Asian populations expand while American populations collapse, fundamentally altering the balance of power and setting the stage for European colonial dominance that will last until the 20th century. The conquest also establishes patterns of colonial exploitation, racial hierarchy, resource extraction, and economic dependency that will be repeated throughout the world as Europeans colonize Africa, Asia, and Oceania, creating a global system where wealth and power concentrate in European metropoles while colonies are reduced to suppliers of raw materials and markets for manufactured goods, patterns that persist in modified form even after decolonization and that help explain contemporary global inequalities. The question of how to judge the conquest morally remains contentious and complex, provoking debates among historians, philosophers, and the descendants of both conquerors and conquered. From one perspective, the conquest was a catastrophic crime against humanity, involving genocide, cultural destruction, economic exploitation, and the imposition of an oppressive colonial order that violated the rights and dignity of millions of indigenous peoples. Pizarro and his followers were motivated primarily by greed, used treachery and violence without moral restraint, destroyed a sophisticated civilization, and established systems of oppression whose effects persist 5 centuries later. Any benefits of Spanish colonization, such as the introduction of new technologies or the eventual independence movements that created modern Latin American states, are far outweighed by the immense suffering, the millions of deaths, the cultural losses, and the long-term damage to indigenous societies. From another perspective, more common among earlier historians and still defended by some today, the conquest, while certainly violent and tragic, was inevitable given the vast technological and political differences between Europe and the Americas in the 16th century, brought Christianity and Western civilization to peoples who lacked written language and advanced technology, and ultimately created the modern nations of Latin America with their distinctive cultures that blend indigenous, European, and African elements. Spanish colonizers, according to this view, were products of their time with beliefs and values different from ours, cannot be judged by modern moral standards, and genuinely believed they were bringing salvation and civilization, even if their methods were harsh. Most contemporary historians reject this latter view as apologetic for colonialism, insisting that moral standards of justice, human dignity, and respect for other cultures should be universal and timeless, that the conquest was wrong by the moral standards of any era, including the 16th century, as shown by Spanish critics like Las Casas who condemned conquistador atrocities in their own time, and that understanding historical context does not require moral relativism or the suspension of ethical judgment. Perhaps the most important legacy of the conquest is not any specific institution or cultural practice, but rather the creation of a wounded historical memory, a collective trauma that shapes how Peruvians and other Andean peoples understand themselves, their past, and their place in the world. Indigenous Peruvians carry the memory of a great civilization destroyed, of ancestors killed by disease and exploitation, of cultures suppressed and denigrated, of centuries of oppression and discrimination, creating what some scholars call historical trauma, the transmission of traumatic experiences across generations through family stories, cultural practices, and social structures. This trauma manifests in high rates of poverty, social problems, and persistent inequalities between indigenous and white or mestizo Peruvians in education, income, and political power. In the continuation of racial discrimination and stereotyping, and in ongoing debates about indigenous rights, land claims, cultural recognition, and the decolonization of Peruvian society and institutions. Yet indigenous Peruvians also carry memories of resistance, survival, and cultural persistence. taking pride in Inca achievements, celebrating indigenous leaders like Tupac Amaru II who fought Spanish oppression, maintaining languages and traditions despite centuries of pressure to assimilate, and in recent decades increasingly asserting indigenous rights, demanding recognition and respect, and challenging the colonial structures and mentalities that still shape Peruvian society. The conquest and colonization of Peru thus remain living history, not merely academic topics but ongoing realities that continue to shape the lives of millions of people, making the story of how 168 Spaniards destroyed the mighty Inca Empire not just a tale of the past but a foundation for understanding the present and imagining different futures. The rediscovery and romanticization of Inca civilization in the 19th and 20th centuries represents another chapter in this complex legacy. As Peruvian nationalists, international scholars, and tourists construct new meanings and narratives around Inca ruins and history. When Hiram Bingham, an American historian, reaches Machu Picchu in 1911, guided by local people who always knew the site existed, and publicizes it internationally, the ruins become a global symbol of lost civilizations, mysterious ancient wisdom, and the tragedy of conquest. Though the narratives constructed around Machu Picchu often ignore or minimize the colonial and post-colonial contexts that shape indigenous life in the present. The professionalization of archaeology and the serious study of Andean civilizations in the 20th century reveal the sophistication and achievements of the Incas and their predecessors, demonstrating that the Andes produced complex societies, monumental architecture, advanced technologies, and sophisticated cultures entirely independently of Old World influences, challenging Eurocentric narratives that portrayed indigenous Americans as primitive or incapable of civilization. Yet archaeological work itself sometimes replicates colonial patterns, with foreign researchers extracting knowledge and artifacts from Peru, indigenous peoples being excluded from or marginalized in the interpretation of their own past, and tourist development around sites like Machu Picchu creating economic benefits for some but also displacing communities and commodifying indigenous culture. The contemporary indigenous rights movement in Peru and throughout Latin America draws on historical memory of the Inca Empire and the conquest to assert indigenous identity, claim political rights, demand land restitution, challenge racism and discrimination, and imagine decolonized futures where indigenous peoples are not marginalized but central to national identity and political life. How did 168 Spaniards destroy the mighty Inca Empire? The question requires a multifaceted answer that goes beyond simply noting Spanish technological advantages or Pizarro's audacity. First, disease was perhaps the most important factor, as smallpox, measles, and other European pathogens killed millions of Incas before the Spanish even arrived in force, destabilizing the empire through the death of Huayna Capac and creating the civil war between Huascar and Atahualpa that fractured Inca unity. Second, the Inca Empire was not a monolithic entity but a patchwork of conquered peoples, many of whom had been incorporated into Tawantinsuyu within living memory and who saw the Spanish as potential liberators or allies. Without the thousands of indigenous allies who joined the Spanish, the conquest would have been impossible. Third, the capture of Atahualpa at Cajamarca was a psychological blow from which the empire never recovered. Because the Inca system was so centralized, so dependent on the divine authority of the Sapa Inca, that his capture and later execution paralyzed the state's ability to respond effectively. Fourth, Spanish military technology, particularly horses, steel weapons, and firearms, provided tactical advantages in individual engagements that allowed small Spanish forces to defeat much larger Inca armies, though we should not overstate this factor, as the Incas did win some battles and did adapt their tactics over time. Fifth, the Spanish brought a different conception of warfare, one focused on total victory, the seizure of resources, and the permanent occupation of territory, while Inca warfare was often more ritualistic, focused on capturing prisoners and demonstrating dominance rather than annihilation, meaning the Spanish were willing to use levels of violence and treachery that shocked their indigenous opponents. Sixth, and perhaps most tragically, the Inca Empire's very sophistication worked against it, as its excellent road system allowed the Spanish to move quickly through the territory. Its storehouses provided supplies for Spanish armies, and its administrative records, kept on quipus, helped the Spanish identify and exploit existing tribute and labor systems for their own benefit. The destruction of the Inca Empire represents one of the great tragedies of human history, the obliteration of a unique civilization that had achieved remarkable things in architecture, agriculture, administration, and art, all without writing, without iron, without the wheel, building an empire through organizational genius, communal labor, and a religious ideology that bound millions together in common purpose. The Incas engineered terraces that turned barren mountainsides into productive farmland, developed hundreds of potato varieties adapted to different microclimates, built rope suspension bridges that spanned vast gorges, and created a system of chasquis, relay runners, who could carry messages from one end of the empire to the other in days, maintaining communication across a territory that stretched 2,500 miles from north to south. Their capital, Cusco, was a planned city with running water, stone buildings that have survived 500 years of earthquakes, and public spaces designed to impress and inspire. The Coricancha, before the Spanish stripped it and built a Christian church on its foundations, was a testament to their devotion and artistic skill. And the royal mummies, preserved corpses of previous Sapa Incas who were brought out for festivals and consulted on important decisions, represented a connection between past and present that gave Inca culture a sense of continuity and permanence. All of this was swept away or transformed beyond recognition by the Spanish conquest, replaced by a colonial system that extracted wealth to enrich Spain while impoverishing Peru, that imposed Christianity while demonizing indigenous religions, and that created a rigid racial hierarchy with Spaniards at the top and indigenous peoples at the bottom, a system whose legacy still shapes Andean society today. Yet we must also recognize that the Inca Empire was not a paradise. It was an authoritarian state built on the conquest and forced incorporation of other peoples, maintained through forced labor in the MITA system where every subject owed labor service to the state, and governed by a nobility that lived in luxury while commoners worked the fields and built the roads. The Sapa Inca's word was absolute law, and dissent could be punished by death or relocation, as entire populations were moved around the empire to break up potential resistance. The empire's expansion was often brutal, with rebellious groups being crushed and their leaders executed, and the requirement that conquered peoples adopt Quechua, the Inca language, and worship Inti alongside their traditional gods, represented a form of cultural imperialism. Many of the ethnic groups that allied with the Spanish did so because they genuinely resented Inca rule and saw the conquest as an opportunity to regain autonomy, even if they could not foresee that the Spanish yoke would be far heavier than the Inca one. The point is not to excuse Spanish actions or to romanticize the Inca Empire, but to understand the conquest as a complex historical event shaped by disease, political divisions, technological differences, strategic decisions, and the actions of thousands of individuals on both sides, each pursuing their own interests and making choices based on incomplete information and cultural assumptions that often led them astray. The legacy of the conquest is written into the landscape of Peru and the broader Andean region, visible in the Spanish colonial architecture overlaying Inca foundations in Cusco, in the predominantly indigenous population that still speaks Quechua and maintains traditions dating back centuries, in the vast inequalities of wealth and power that persist to this day, and in the way Peruvians grapple with their complex heritage, simultaneously proud of their Inca past and shaped by their Spanish colonial experience. The story of how 168 Spaniards destroyed the mighty Inca Empire is ultimately a story about how empires, no matter how powerful, are vulnerable to a combination of internal weakness, external shock, and historical contingency. How disease can accomplish what armies cannot, how the decisions of a few individuals can alter the fate of millions, and how the encounter between different civilizations, when mediated by violence and exploitation rather than mutual respect, creates wounds that take centuries to heal. Machu Picchu, the famous Inca citadel that the Spanish never found and that lay hidden until 1911, stands today as a symbol of what was lost, its precisely fitted stones and breathtaking location a reminder of Inca achievement, but also a ruin, abandoned and silent, a monument to a civilization that could not survive contact with European expansion, disease, and colonialism. The conquest of the Inca Empire was not inevitable. Had Huayna Capac not died when he did, had Atahualpa been more cautious at Cajamarca, had the Spanish been less ruthless or more divided, history might have unfolded differently. But the combination of factors that came together in 1532 created a perfect storm that brought down one of the great empires of human history in less than a decade. A cautionary tale about the fragility of civilizations and the catastrophic consequences when cultures collide with such asymmetric power and such mutual incomprehension, and a reminder that the past is never truly past but continues to shape our present in ways